Hello and welcome to this Literature Revision System lesson on Charlotte Mew's The Farmer's Bride for AQA GCSE Literature. This lesson will help prepare you for the Love and Relationships poetry question in the exam. Okay, the context of the poem. This is a dramatic monologue, and that's when a writer or a poet takes on the personality, the persona, of a fictitious character. In this case, Charlotte Mew is writing as if she is a farmer, right about the turn of the century, from the 19th to 20th century. And this form of the dramatic monologue was quite often used by Charlotte Mew, and it enabled her to explore challenging themes such as gender politics, mental illness, and sexuality. In this poem, she criticises the powerlessness of women. Women's suffrage and societal rights were prominent issues in her time, and she suggests in this poem that inequality between the sexes actually damages both sexes. It damages everyone, as we'll see in the dysfunctional marriage that she describes. The farmer chose his bride. Women then had little choice and were often married off to an older man who had some wealth by their families, almost a kind of arranged marriage. Women were not able to have independent financial means, and so very often families would look to a man who had some wealth who could support the daughter and raise a family. This poem shows the destructive impact of that on a young girl who is led into this marriage, which then terrifies her because she is expected to perform the duties of a wife, but she's really too young and ill prepared for that. And this leads to some kind of mental breakdown, it would seem, that she has. And so it's an exploration of mental illness. Charlotte Mew herself was preoccupied with that as she feared for her own health in regards to that. Okay, the poem. 3 summers since I chose a maid, too young maybe, but more's to do at harvest time than bide and woo. When us was wed, she turned afraid of love and me and all things human. Like the shut of a winter's day, her smile went out, and 'twa'n't a woman, more like a little frightened fay. One night in the fall she runned away. Out among the sheep her be, they said, should properly have been abed, but sure enough she wasn't there, lying awake with her wide brown stare. So over 7-acre field and up along across the down we chased her, flying like a hare before our lanterns. To Churchtown, all in a shiver and a scare we caught her, fetched her home at last and turned the key upon her fast. She does the work about the house as well as most, but like a mouse, happy enough to chat and play with birds and rabbits and such as they, so long as menfolk keep away. Not near, her eyes beseech, when one of us comes within reach. The women say that beasts in stall look round like children at her call. I've hardly heard her speak at all. Shy as a leveret, swift as he, straight and slight as a young larch tree, sweet as the first wild violets she, to her wild self, but what to me? The short days shorten, and the oaks are brown. The blue smoke rises to the low grey sky. One leaf in the still air falls slowly down. A magpie's spotted feathers lie on the black earth spread white with rime. The berries redden up to Christmas time. What's Christmas time without there be some other in the house than we? She sleeps up in the attic there, alone, poor maid. 'Tis but a stair betwixt us. Oh, my God! The down, the soft young down of her, the brown of her eyes, her hair. So to summarise the content of the poem, the kind of narrative, the farmer admits the wife he chose was too young. He describes how she ran away. She was scared of him. She was chased and caught by the farm workers. Now, the terror of that situation for the girl, the farmer doesn't register in that narrative, does he? After her return, she meekly did her housework, but kept away from all men, instead spending time with the animals and nature. As time passes and Christmas approaches, the farmer is sad that he doesn't have children. And the poem ends with that description of his wife, and it seems that he longs to be with her physically. And by physically, we should read sexually, I think, would be the subtext. Okay, As always, we're going to focus on 3 key aspects. Remember, as always in these poems, there is so much that we could write, we could analyse. But we're preparing for an exam response when we have 45 minutes to produce a couple of sides of writing. So we're going to focus on 3 aspects, beginning, middle and end, and I've highlighted those in this text, yellow, blue and green. I'd suggest, as always, that you highlight and annotate your own copy of the anthology, your own copy of the poem, using these annotations that are on the screen. Some of this key vocabulary may be challenging for you, or you may not be familiar with all of it. Please see the vocabulary lesson on the Literature Revision System's website. It's a free lesson to help you learn this vocab. That's key to the analysis. Okay, so the first point is we're going to look at the use of the similes, like a hare and like a mouse. Look at the transformation in her character they suggest after she's caught. And then we're going to look at the pronouns. So a couple of points which we're going to weave together for our first analysis. So it's describing quite a cold, dysfunctional marriage. The title itself, The Farmer's Bride, suggests that this isn't an equal relationship. That women were seen almost as possessions, really, possession of the farmer in this case. And they were kind of powerless, really, and didn't have the liberty of choice. So the girl escapes, and the simile like a hare describes that kind of the desperation, but also the kind of the wild nature. The word wild we'll refer to in our second key paragraph, but here I think it suggests a sense of her desire for freedom, because she was too young for the responsibility of marriage and for the intimacy of marriage. So after her desperate attempt to escape, that energy of the simile like a hare is transformed into her becoming like a mouse, which suggests her timidity and her meekness is a result of her powerlessness. She is trapped in this marriage. The plural pronouns they and we, as in we caught her, and the repeated use of these pronouns with us and we throughout the poem suggests Mew actually may be commenting on wider societal expectations of a woman's place in marriage. So you may want to pause this to continue making notes, but before we move on to paragraph 2. And that's looking at that lovely couplet, sweet as the first wild violets she to her wild self, but what to me. Now there's a few things I'd like to investigate here or explore. First of all, it's the image again, the simile as the first wild violets. That's a really delicate simile that describes her beauty and the farmer's appreciation of her beauty. So this isn't a brutal man. He seems to be quite sensitive to her beauty and to her shyness as well, and timidity. He doesn't express any anger. He expresses admiration. But it doesn't suggest, this poem, that he's able to communicate that to her. They seem to be very separate. So in looking at that simile, then first wild violets, we've got the sibilants. That's the alliteration of the S sound in first, and violets, and sweet, and she. And it creates quite a hushed, almost reverential tone of his admiration of her beauty and of her delicacy. The word wild is repeated, isn't it, which makes it significant perhaps. It may suggest his admiration for her as being some like a creature of nature, but also perhaps that it's something unknowable, wild and untamable, and something he cannot fathom, understand, or be close to. We've then got the caesura after wild self. That's the full stop in the middle of the line, which creates that pause. That's known as a caesura. That creates a sense of their separation, doesn't it? Before it leads into that rhetorical question, but what to me? Isolating that pronoun me at the end of the line makes him seem isolated, and it may be suggesting a sense of growing frustration as the year passes, as their relationship passes, and they don't become any closer. So those are the key ideas for our second paragraph of analysis. And then finally, as always, we're going to look at the last line, or the end of the poem. And here I want to focus on the kind of breakdown in the grammar, the repetition, and how it builds up a rhythm and momentum at the end of the poem. It would seem that the bride tries to keep herself to herself as much as possible and sleeps indeed in the attic, which is where servants would sleep traditionally at that time. So she is hiding away from her husband and terrified of any intimacy with him at night. And so she stays in the attic, but it would seem that he is longing for her physically, and that's why we have these physical descriptions of colour and texture, which might imply his desire for her physically. And then we've got this repetition as well, the brown, the eyes, hair. It conveys the farmer's breathless admiration, again, of her beauty, but also that repetition does build up a sense of perhaps his control breaking down, of his control of himself. We've got the repetition, the repeated commas, the dash. It seems that the grammar is breaking down, the syntax, the word order is clumsily breaking down there, as if his self-control is breaking down. Also, that repetition creates a bit of a rhythm, doesn't it? Almost like a momentum. And if we look at what the farmer's describing there, it seems that he's stood on the top step leading to the attic, as if he's climbed the stairs of the attic towards her room and is just on the verge of perhaps going into her room. And that momentum of the brown, her eyes, her hair, it would seem that he's moving towards her, towards his bride. And that could be a sinister interpretation there we could have. This climbing of the stairs to her attic room may be leading to him going into the room and perhaps demanding his married right as a husband, which in those days would have been perfectly legal for him to physically demand sexual relations with her. So there's quite an ominous ending, a real quite sinister ending to that poem. The bride is of course silent, and this may again be Mew making a societal point, a point about the fact that women had no voice, they had no power at that time. So those would be the ideas for our final paragraph of analysis. Okay, as always, we'll be using this framework, this petal framework that I shared with you in previous lessons, and you may already be familiar with, where you point out the context, contextualize the quotation, have the evidence, use terminology accurately, analyze and develop your argument, perhaps linking to another quotation so you have a more thorough and developed argument, or to another poem, another text. So we'll use that framework because it neatly maps to the mark scheme and the requirements of the mark scheme. So if we look back to our first key point, I'll just show you how we would create a paragraph of essay analysis from these ideas. So we could begin like this. Mew describes an emotionally cold marriage, and the title itself, The Farmer's Bride, suggests how women were then seen as their husband's possession. The simile, like a hare, suggests her natural wild nature, but also, as she was too young, her need to be free. After her desperate attempt to escape, the farmer reveals we caught her. The repeated use of plural pronouns us and we suggests Mew may actually be commenting on wider societal expectations of a woman's place in marriage. She becomes like a mouse, which implies her timidity is a result of powerlessness. Okay, so that's a fluent essay paragraph using those ideas and putting them in that petal format, which I've highlighted here for you, so you can see how the examiner is looking for subject terminology. We have it. He's looking for the quotations to be used, to be blended in a fluent essay style. And then we've got the developed and linked explanations, the exploration really of Mew's use of language, and all of this would score against the mark scheme at the top levels. So the essay, though, it's not an essay on one text only. It's a comparative task. If you've seen the previous lessons, you'll know that I'm looking at the love and relationships cluster of poetry as two categories of either romantic love or family love. And so for the romantic love poems, I'm using Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet 29 as a key poem, with which we'll compare the other poems. And so, for example, a comparative introduction linking these two poems might look like this. Both I Think of Thee and The Farmer's Bride describe unconsummated desire, because they're both about relationships that haven't been, between the couples haven't had sex yet. So that's what the word unconsummated means. So that's the link between the two poems. However, Browning's sonnet is an intense expression of love for her fiancé, whereas Muir's dramatic monologue describes a dysfunctional marriage where the young bride is terrified of intimacy with her older husband. So, keeping to that simple comparative structure, both, however, whereas this poem would instantly set out for the examiner that you're meeting the requirements of the mark scheme to create a comparative response. So that would be the suggested introduction. Now, if you've seen the previous lessons, you'll know that there's an ebook available which has a series of exercises that will take you step by step from grade 7 through to grade 9, using the analysis I'm presenting in these lessons and showing you how you build a comparative essay structure that would secure, first of all, a grade 7, and then working through the grade 8 and grade 9 exercises so that you'll be confident you can achieve the very top grades in the exam. Okay, the ebook includes these sequenced exercises focusing on vocabulary, analysis of each of the poems. There are modelled essays at grades 7, 8 and 9, along with a series of exercises to help you become familiar with the skills and knowledge that you'll need to achieve those grades. As well as that, you'll find a revision strategy for 2023 exams. The resources are in the ebook, but also at you'll be able to access that at the Literature Revision Systems website. The link is just below this. If you find this useful, please be sure to check the next lessons. Thanks for attending Literature Revision Systems.